someone will mention a technology that they're using, and I'm just like, wow, that is biology at its best. Let's get more of that.
Today's episode is a conversation between Karl and I to recap nearly 100 episodes and 2 years of the Grow Everything podcast. Thank you so much for listening.
Erum, what's going on?
I'm feeling a bit discombobulated right now. How are we about to hit 100 episodes? I feel like we did the first episode like 2 days ago.
Yeah, I mean, it does feel that way. But since we've been very consistent about recording and we're each kind of a taskmaster, I think you keep doing things consistently for a couple of years. And the next thing you know, you're at 100 episodes. But by the way, this is only episode 99.
Yeah, I know we have a special treat for episode 100, but felt like a good time to reflect. I mean, there's been so many amazing guests on the podcast. And besides a podcast, we are actual people that have jobs and go to events and meet people and do projects. And a lot of the podcast has influenced some of those projects. And those projects influence the podcast. It's a symbiotic relationship. So figured it'd be a good time to just catch people up. To say, hey, look, this is all that transpired between the first episode, which is a teaser, and I recommend everyone listening to it, and maybe
not listening to it.
Maybe not listening to it, but what are some things that you're thinking about, Karl? I mean, this has been something that we have consistently done. It's been our lives for the past 2 years. What do you want to reflect on?
How much work it is. I think people don't understand. I mean, we usually start off the episode by talking about something we're doing or people we're seeing. I know it sounds like we're always going to events, which is part of what we do for our business. And we do that as part of a community of biotech people in New York City. And we're very lucky to have that community, not just here, but then when we go to Boston or San Francisco or even Paris or India, like you went. But I think that people probably don't understand that there is a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes. And I think we should do a shout out and a thank you to Jordan, who was here for most of those 2 years. She just left to pursue a career in medicine. And then, of course, we have to give thanks to our team of editors and production people at Amplify Media. So there is a whole village behind what you listen to every week.
Yeah, absolutely. Because sometimes when I'll tell people, I don't feel this way anymore about early days. It's like, oh yeah, I have a podcast. Or like, so does everyone and my mom. So what? Who cares? But now that we have 100 episodes, we're standing the test of time and discipline. And now I'm more confident. Like, yeah, I have a podcast over 100 episodes. And it's not just about a podcast. It's about a movement. It's about being able to create a platform for the voices of those creating the bioeconomy to be heard in a way that's really accessible. We've been getting a lot of feedback and people coming up to us at events, thanking us for sticking with it and bringing all these people together. Yes, it's a podcast, but we also are on YouTube. So there's video also being produced and we have live events now. So it's becoming its own brand. And I'm very excited to see how we continue to evolve this platform.
And do you remember, Erum, how we decided we were going to do this? You and I just started to work together again. I don't remember how we got on the topic of doing a podcast, but do you remember what it was that finally pushed you over to saying, you know what, this is a good idea?
Yeah, I mean, the main thing was that we were already having all of these amazing conversations with founders and investors. Just between you and I always enjoyed our conversations. I'm like, man, it's so fun to talk about these things because it's true, it's science. You know, I like to nerd out. We're very, very curious people. But then I would bring these conversations to my other friends who are not biologists. And they're like, wait, what is polybion doing? Like, what? You can make leather out of microbes eating waste? Like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, yes, it's true. And then I would be talking at this party, I'd be talking about biotech for 20, 30 minutes. And I'm like, people are interested. People are very interested. And thinking about a cost-benefit analysis, there were very accessible tools that could be used. And we were like, okay, we could do this. But then really thinking the whole plan, we knew that it would require a lot of time and dedication. So we're like, all right, let's see if we can find a partner to really do a lot of the heavy lift in editing and collaborate with us that understand the podcasting world and what it means. We were able to rally. I think that was a big part of it, but also we are a business and we're like, what type of asset can we create that adds value to the industry that could be of interest to larger companies as well as we start generating more of an audience that is very interested in growing everything using biology and biotech. So we thought about it very strategically and we've been doing it. What about you? I mean, I know that we have a lot of the same story we talk about, like, why are we still doing this? We sometimes are so bogged down with a lot of our client work, which I don't want to say bogged down because it sounds like a bad thing. We love doing client work, but at the same time, it can get overwhelming. So what are your thoughts?
So there's a couple things. When we were first starting out, I didn't realize how much work would go into it, but I knew that once we had a production team in place, things were probably going to get easier, which they did. I think if you and I were trying to do all of it, I don't think we'd be at episode 100. The other thing is at the beginning, I had said, I want to make sure that as we create this asset, it doesn't become something that doesn't get reused. So we have been very strategic in terms of using the podcast and reusing episodes. And we haven't even really started to reuse clips from episodes because there is a lot. When you generate 100 episodes, that means that you've got 100 hours of content or more. And we haven't even really tapped into it. Yes, we do Throwback Thursday promos, but we can go into the archives of the podcast. We could generate a book right now that would be called How to Grow Everything based on the first 100 episodes. We can create all sorts of video and teasers and media based on that. And I think going into it for me, that was actually something really important because we do see a lot of podcasts, especially niche podcasts, that never do anything else with their content except for publish it every week. I think that that's a wasted effort. That content is very valuable. And then the other thing I would just say is, let's just say like after episode 20 or 30, some of the feedback we got were people who were saying to us, thanks for having me on the podcast. I shared it with my mom or I shared it with my partner and they finally understood what we do. Someone said to us early on, that was the clearest explanation of what my partner does. So I think we're doing the people we interview a service as well as telling people their story, but helping them tell their story in a way that's very clear. One of the things that we try to do when we talk to a potential guest is we're like, look, we try to keep it super high level because when we set out to do this podcast, we were really intentional. We wanted to expose more people to biotechnology, given that most of the biotech podcasts out there are focused on the biotech industry, which is fine. That's great. We wanted to be more broad-based. From those early episodes, Erum, what kind of feedback did you get that you find was useful for us?
The feedback I got was really keep going, keep doing what you're doing. A lot of it was like, oh, you should have this person on the podcast or this person on the podcast. So part of our episodes at the end, we ask if you have any ideas, please reach out. And the listeners are reaching out. But what about you? Anyone particular reach out to you and had any feedback or thoughts?
I mean, beyond what I just said about the early guests who said that they appreciated the way we approached the questions, I think that was key. But I think what surprised me too is probably around episode, let's say 30, we started to get cold inbound. And we probably get 3 to 5 of those a month. But it's been super interesting that there's a whole bunch of people out there who are reaching out. But what about in terms of the episodes, Erum? We've had almost 100 guests. Who stands out? And I know it's not fair because we love all of our guests and we've had some really interesting repeat guests, but is there anybody that really stands out to you?
Yeah, that is a tough question, but I would say one of the episodes that I felt I learned a lot was, of course, the Chief Science Officer of LanzaTech. So Zara Summers came on the podcast and it was even talking about LanzaTech, which a lot of times we don't necessarily talk about the company. Of course we do. And that is part of the podcast to learn about how these companies are applying their knowledge of biology and biotechnology to the world in an economic way. But when she was talking about how microbes could be used to bioremediate and how the plains in the middle of the US, there's a huge swaths of land that could be regenerated. And what could we do with that land once it's regenerated? And then we talked about the US, but then it's thinking of other barren land that was once fertile. And how can we reclaim that land and use it once again, revitalize it? It's like, okay, well, if we can revitalize barren land on Earth, how can we revitalize the land on other planets? I felt like that was such a profound thought. And I think the way that Zara was speaking and it was very friendly and hopeful and matter of fact, I walked away from that episode thinking, yes, this episode was great, but just having conversations with scientists who are in executive positions in companies, they have a very interesting way of thinking. And I think those type of people are perfect for the podcast. What about you?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't want to claim favorites with anybody, but I will say two things. One is what you mentioned, reclaimed land, reclaiming unfertile land. By the way, did you see that the Sahara Desert flooded?
What?
Yeah,
When? What's going on?
just like in the last couple of weeks.
What part of it? I mean, it's so huge.
I know. I don't know the details, but it made me think of you. Listeners don't know this, but Erum is obsessed with revitalizing the Sahara and creating canals through the Sahara because as climate change causes the oceans to rise, this could be a way of offsetting climate change. But anyway, that's an aside. But again, I'm super surprised by some of these high-level conversations we have with scientists. And since you mentioned reclaiming unused or non-fertile land, I just think that like the conversations we had with Elizabeth Reynolds and Kate Rubins, both talking about space, which is really your area much more than mine, I thought were just superb conversations. And if you haven't listened to those, you should.
Hi, a quick shout out to our sponsor, Messaging Lab, the force multiplier for biotech. Your biotech company is making the world a better place. You know that, we know that. But does the world? There's a big reason why some biotech companies attract investors, sign up customers, and get attention. That reason is strategic communications. At Messaging Lab, we translate complex science and economics into compelling narratives. And we have done that for the most successful biotech companies across healthcare, agriculture, personal care and beauty, materials, and the list goes on. We're here to make sure your ideas not only get heard, but resonate with your audience. So if it's time to amplify your company's voice, visit messaginglab.com to explore how we can elevate your story and grow your business.
Right now, those are the two that stand out for me, but there's been so many times, again, where someone will mention a technology that they're using, and I'm just like, wow, that is biology at its best. Let's get more of that.
Yeah.
We've had 3 repeat guests. There's been 3 people who've been on twice. John Cumbers of SymBioBeta, Seth Yakatan, who had one of the most popular episodes for the longest time, Seth Yakatan of Catan Associates, and then Charles Dimmler of Checkerspot. We need to get more repeat guests on. And I'm just thinking of some of the more recent people that we've had, like Kate Rubins would be great to have again, or even going back to the very beginning, Shara Tiku of C16. It's time to bring her back on. She just had a baby. Congratulations. Cheryl, we're looking forward to you getting off of maternity leave so you can come back on the Grow Everything podcast.
As a co-founder and CEO of a company, I don't know if she technically has maternity leave. If she does, good for her. I think I talked to her a little bit about it. She's never completely off. I totally understand how that is. But hey, that's cool. And I'm excited for her. Also, our friends. It's so funny because we had some of our friends that we hang out a lot. Interestingly, 3 of our friends that came on, they're all scientists that turn investors. I thought it was so interesting because we have such great conversations. Some of them are critical of maybe policy or funding mechanisms or just companies. But when they come on the pod, of course, representing their funds, the conversations we have offline are obviously more friendly. Those are private conversations, so they can feel more free to say things versus something that's streaming on all popular streaming services. So they're very buttoned up and very professional. But I'm going to shout out to Julie Wolf of 2048, Sabria Stukes of Indie Bio New York, and also Shelby Nusad of Compound. They're great. Their episodes are very illuminating, especially for entrepreneurs that are looking to get into the bioeconomy. And they have a company that they believe should be venture backed. That's a big question to ask yourself if that's something that you're thinking of.
Well, and it's funny that you point out the 3 of them because 2 of them were co-hosts. Shelby and Julie were both co-hosts when either one of us was gone. Mm-hmm. And Sabria had one of the fastest climbing episodes right after we recorded it. I mean, it's always surprising to watch the numbers and to see someone all of a sudden climb the charts and end up like in that top 3 position. For the longest time, Cass Smith of Ginkgo Bioworks in that number 1 position. And then he got edged out by Edward Shenderovich of Synonym. And then Sabria came out of nowhere, has been in that top 10 for a while too. What's also interesting about talking about our friends is 3 of them have been on and we see them pretty regularly. But then there's like a whole bunch of other New York people that we've had on, like Vishal of Annika and Ellen Jorgensen, his co-founder, who also founded GenSpace. And then Beth Tuck, who was running GenSpace for a long time. Who else is in like the New York ecosystem that we've had on? I feel like there's a bunch of other people, but maybe it's less than I think.
Yeah, there's a lot. I'm looking at the list, but of course we have Suzanne Lee of Biofabricate, who is just amazing. Being able to bridge brands and biology is incredible. And she does it with such grace and able to bring it all together, making scientists feel comfortable with the brands feeling comfortable with the scientists, all through her Biofabricate Summit that she hosts along with some of her team, Amy Cognan being one of those people. She is a New Yorker, but I think she's moving. But I would like to definitely point out that if anyone listening is interested in biomaterials and how they go from the lab to the store, you have to join Biofabricate. She recently created a community membership model, which is great. A lot of people create memberships and you join, you get a newsletter or something. But Suzanne and Amy have taken it a step further and they have Zoom calls with brands present, with founders, with investors, and have topical conversations that are important for the industry. And to be able to have that access as a founder is huge.
Well, and speaking of biomaterials, I mean, we tend to do a lot of back-end analysis in terms of not just what episodes are working, but we've done an analysis of all the episodes together to figure out what have been the topics that we've covered the most. And what's really surprised me about that is we've done more episodes on biomaterials than anything else. And that's been closely followed by synthetic biology and then climate change. And I think one of the things that we have to do, I've been saying this for a while, is we should do a user guide, especially now that we are reaching 100 episodes, where we can say, if you're into biomaterials, here's the episodes you should listen to. If you're into synthetic biology, if you're into climate change, this is where you should get started. I think that'll be very useful to listeners. If that's something you guys want to see, please let us know.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it would be great to continue highlighting the listeners.
Yeah. So a couple of really notable encounters with people. One is Nimi Vashi, who's a scientist in the San Francisco area. And when we met her at SymBioBeta, we had this long talk about like how she listened to the podcast, how she enjoyed it. Roya Agibi of Light One Bio, which is a color manufacturer in Canada. When we talked to her about doing some work together, she was like, I feel like I'm on the podcast with you guys. Can I come on the podcast? Maybe that could be something we do in the future. Juan Carlos Garcia of P&G also said the same thing to us. He had listened to our biostrategy episode and said, I felt like I was in the room. I felt like you were talking to me. And who have you had, Erum, that has said, oh, I know the podcast and it's great to meet you?
Yeah. During Climate Week, I went to an event at Indie Bio. It was Jupiter One's first big event. It was great. Jupiter One is a climate biotech fund. And some of the companies that we know really well, they're part of their fund. But we went to that event and there was a gentleman, his name's Gabe. I forget his last name, but it was a really interesting story because he was like, oh, hi, Rum. It's nice to meet you and I recognize your voice. And he's like, I was recommended the podcast because I work in the lab and sometimes I feel very isolated and I question why I'm doing the work. Why am I still doing these experiments? They're not really getting to my hypothesis, or it's a slog. And I question myself and it's a very lonely journey. He's telling me how he was expressing this to his friend. His friend's like, listen to the Grow Everything podcast. And he said he started listening and he really appreciated it. So he listens when he's in the lab or when he's looking to get inspired. And I thought that that was a really interesting application of our podcast. So for all the scientists that question, why the hell am I going down this rabbit hole? This is why. You're doing it because we need a shift to bio-based ingredients to look at biology for our health and for planetary health. And there's a lot of people that are with you doing that as well. So it's important to keep going, because we need your solution. We need your science. We need the fact that you have the intelligence to pursue something like this. So thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much. I mean, I love hearing from the people who are at the bench or who've known us and are like listening to the podcast. I'm thinking of Kiara and Cole at Rice University. They've been huge fans and we love them. They were actually Patreon. So thank you, Kiara and Cole, for supporting us. We really appreciate it.
Jehan Kaval reached out recently to me via LinkedIn and said, hey, look, I really love all of your episodes. It's really interesting to learn, but I would love to learn more about how the use of AI influences climate and environment because it's very energy intensive. And I'm like, that's a really great conversation to have. So thank you, Jehan, for reaching out and sharing that.
What's next? What's the next 100 episodes going to look like?
Yeah. So for the next 100 episodes, we're going to, of course, have more guests that are building companies, leveraging biology that are further along. So some of the companies we had are a bit earlier stage, but I think some of the later stage companies that are looking to biologize their operations. So we're looking at CPG companies that are really trying to understand how can they make a switch to using bio-based materials for packaging, bio-based ingredients for their products. And they have their own efforts going on now, but it'll be good for our listeners to hear what exactly they're doing to see how they could be supportive of those efforts or more competitive. I mean, we live in a capitalistic society, so it'd be interesting to get some intel. We're all getting intel. And then also having our guests come back. You're talking about some of our double featured guests. So getting some more of our guests to come back on and sharing their progress. Maybe they've moved to different positions. We've seen that a lot where a guest moved to a different company after they came onto our podcast. So it'll be interesting to see how they've taken their experience and shifted and navigated into a different company or different space. And then I think it'll be good to get people that are not in the industry at all, but are looking to explore. So maybe this would be a flipped episode where they're asking us questions and we're helping them navigate live or on the podcast about how they can rethink or relook at their industry or their company from a biotechnology lens. So I think that would be very interesting. And I think some crazy things are going to come up. We like to experiment. We like to test things also. And I think that we kind of agreed to this since we did it fairly successfully last time is do more live podcasts. So I think that will happen. Oh, and then finally, probably some swag. I think at this point, we have some very interesting titles for our episodes. So throwing that on a t-shirt or a mug, I think would make great company gifts. We're ready to level up. 100 episodes, we have the swagger. We're ready to go to the next 100, 200, 300, bring more guest hosts. It's going to be a great time for Grow Everything because we keep growing.
100%. And I think we're recording this at a very interesting time. On the political side, we're in the midst of a presidential election, and both candidates have been appearing on podcasts. Kamala Harris was on Call Me Daddy and got a lot of flack for that. But what's interesting is that she's going where her audience is, and a lot of the audience is on podcasts. Former President Trump is doing the same thing. So I think we should be hoping to get some of those kinds of people on, maybe not the president, but their science/biotech commissioner, so that we can expand the audience. And I mean, we've talked about Rob Lowe. I think Rob Lowe should be on here to talk about Unstable. Maybe that could be episode 150, episode 200. Robert Downey Jr. should be on here because not only has he played Iron Man, but he has funded some interesting science projects and is out there advocating for more science. It'd be great to have him on here. And I know I've mentioned in the past, I'd love to get J-Lo because I want to know what happened to her CRISPR show that she was producing that was supposed to happen like 5 or 10 years ago. It never happened. I'm very disappointed by that. And there's a bunch of science fiction people that we should get on here. Science fiction authors are thinking about the future. We're talking about the present and how companies and entrepreneurs are creating a better future for us. What are science fiction authors that we can learn from that maybe we can get on here to talk about and speculate what that future is going to look like? But I love the idea of having someone come on and ask us the questions as they try to biologize their company. We need to find the person who'd be willing to come on here and to do that.
Yeah. And the person might already be thinking about it, but maybe just wants to chat about it. And it's like, all right, maybe it's like a live discovery call.
Yeah.
Hey, everyone, we'll teach you how to do B2B sales. We're pivoting.
By the way, B2B sales is the same as trying to get an investor. So they're very similar. It's a numbers game and there is a strategy and a science to it. So we're happy to talk about that because that is our day-to-day business.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's been so much fun and I can't wait for our next episode and future episodes.
So as we close this episode out, I just want to say once again, thank you to Hector Santisteban and the team at Amplify. We really have to thank Jordan Taylor for being here and helping us out on these first 100 episodes. Jordan, we miss you so much. You always have a job at Messaging Lab or at Grow Everything. And thank you, of course, to all the listeners and everybody who's been a part of this journey. We're looking forward to having you come along for the next 100 episodes.
Yep, absolutely. And stay tuned for our next episode. We're not going to tell you who will be on. If you're listening to this 2 weeks since we record this, you'll know. But we picked this person because they are a darling of the industry, very creative. And because of this person's efforts, Karl and I met. So we feel like this is going to be an amazing guest to speculate with, to dream with, and it will be a lot of fun and a great way to celebrate 100 episodes. So as we always like to say, any questions, comments, interview ideas, any thoughts you might have, please share them with us. All of our contact information is in the show notes. We are on social media, so you can chat with us there about anything. As we mentioned, we have a Patreon community. Patreon guests are very near and dear to our hearts. We appreciate all of the support and effort, so please consider being a Patreon member.
All right.